So talking about section 4 of this essay, which is really the heart, the center, and the most crucial part of the essay. The essay, after all, is called The Experience of Death, and one can wonder whether Landsberg has given us any account of that. Remember, he's rejected Max Shaler's account of the experience of death, which is the experience of approaching death as one ages, and he has made some claims about how death and its true nature reveals itself only when we realize ourselves as individual persons, because it's only then that we realize the significance of death. That is, that death threatens me as a unique individual, threatens to wipe me out. And if I affirm myself as a being that has a unique personality and value, then death threatens to annihilate that, and that's why death is characterized as a threat or menace. So one could ask, is the experience of death that experience, the dread or fear of my unique existence as a person being annihilated? Well, it really wouldn't be the experience of death. What it would be the experience of the fear of death, I think. So he takes us a little farther into, you might say, as close as we can get, you might say, to an experience of death in section 4. And that is, section 4 is really about the death of the other, the death of someone else, but not just anyone else. To get the full experience, I think, clearly has to be the death of a loved one, because unless love is involved, as we'll see, the experience isn't the full experience of death. So section 4 is called the death of a friend, okay, and the experience of repetition. I don't know why that is there. I mean, it's really about the death of a friend. And so he wants to do, let's say, a phenomenology, which is a description of the experience of being with someone who's dying, and being with somebody while they die, and someone that you love. His experience is quite gripping. I'm looking at page 199. In characterizing what this experience is like, he says perhaps the most famous thing he's ever said. And this is a quote you'll see people quoting Landsberg out of context, but at least quoting Landsberg, which is always good. He says on page 199, the death of a man we love with such a love should tell us something decisive which reaches beyond the domain of biological fact. The death of one's neighbor is infinitely more than just the death of another. And he might have said the death of someone that you love. He uses neighbor, I think, in the Christian sense, frankly. But that's it. The death of one's neighbor is infinitely more than just the death of another. Where there is a question of the person, we may reach the possibility of an ontological relationship to death. The only means of extracting from authentic experience all the meaning it contains is to relive it in memory. So what he does then, I think, is relives his own experience of being with his neighbor, someone he's attached to, someone he loves, while they are dying. And it's quite something, and it leads us, I think, to a very interesting place. He says, first of all, we perceive a process being completed in the organism of the other. Here, he is presented to us as essentially a living body. That is, what he's saying there is that the experience of being with somebody while they're dying is overwhelmingly being in the presence of a suffering body, of a suffering organism. Because after all, the process of dying is a bodily process of the suffering and the disintegration of the biological organism. We know that the person, as opposed to the body, the person we love still exists as such, only he is hidden behind this process, the way that our personhood and our individuality are often hidden by bodily processes, especially illness and physical pain. The way that one of the effects of, say, having a really, really bad physical pain of any sort, migraine headache, back pain, nausea, that your personhood almost gets engulfed by the biological reality of your suffering, and that's the experience of being with a person who's dying. They're hidden. Their personhood is hidden under their body, under their bodily suffering. Only he is hidden behind this process, though he may perhaps reappear at times, for instance, in a few last brief words. But the dominant fact is this, that a living body is suffering. Our own body suffers in the flesh with that of our suffering comrade. The idea of being with somebody who's a body in pain. And then there comes a moment when all is calm, when all seems over and the contorted features of the well-loved face relax. It is precisely at this moment, when the living being abandons us, that we shall experience the mysterious absence of the person as spirit. And that's the key, right? That is, this is how close we can get to the experience of death when we experience the absence of the person as spirit. That is, he's talking about the moment when we realize the person has died. And what we realize is that with the death of their body, their presence as spirit or their presence as person has disappeared as well. For a moment we have a feeling of relief, he continues. The suffering of our bodily sympathy is over, but immediately we are carried away into the strange, cold world of death fulfilled. The vital pity we felt is thus suspended in a void, and suddenly gives way to the profound awareness that this being and all the uniqueness of his person is no longer there, and can no more return into this body. He will never speak to us again. He will never live again in community with us as he used to do, never again. So, for him, the experience of being with somebody while they're dying and then being with them after they've died, because of course there's something problematic of being with them when they die, because the moment of death may be something that neither they or we could ever possibly experience. We experience them in the process of dying, and then we notice when they have died. But that's the moment, you might say, where we get closest to an experience of death. That experience of death is the experience of the absence of the person. That is, when we realize that the person is absent, and not absent in the usual way that persons are absent. I mean, if your mom or your dad leaves on a business trip when you're a kid, they're absent, but you know that they'll come back. It's still possible to communicate with them. If your child goes off to college, they're absent, but you can still possible to communicate with them. The absence of death is a permanent absence. He will never speak to us again. He will never speak to us again. He will never live again in community with us as he used to. This is the full power of death, is its permanence, and it's a necessary absence. That is, it's an absence that cannot be filled. It's a distance that cannot be spanned between us and the departed. Now this is what leads us to, I think, the most important moment in the whole essay. He continues, the higher forms of faith, and he's just talking about Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, so-called, high religions, I don't know. The higher forms of faith and survival are in complete agreement with this experience. That is, even people who believe in an afterlife and the immortality of the soul will agree that this experience of absence is a human experience that we have. Person is gone. They were there, and in some absolutely mysterious way, they are gone. It's that incredible moment. It's similar to the moment if you're in the room when somebody's born. There's this magical thing where, woman is in the process of giving birth, which is also a very bodily thing. I don't know if you've ever been there or done it yourself, but there's something magical about it, because one moment there's like 3 or 4 people in the room, say 4 people in the room, and the next moment there's 5 people in the room, and nobody's come in any doors or windows. It's just that there's a new person there. It's a miracle. It's a wonderful thing. But it has this tragic counterpart in death, where you're being with the dying person. There's maybe 4 people in the room, and then there's 3 people in the room, and no one's going out a door or a window. this mysterious disappearance of the person, I think is what he's talking about. This incredibly traumatic moment when you realize that that person is absent in a sort of permanent way, this permanent absence. So he continues, the higher forms of faith and survival are in complete agreement with this experience. They speak of the spiritual personality not as annihilated, that is, not as made nothing, but only as if vanished, as if existing in absence. If death were the absent presence, then the dead man is not present absence. The immediate experience of the death of the other does not, at first, offer us any certainty of his survival. Again, I think, very courageous thing for a Christian to say is that the immediate experience of death, the phenomenology of being with the person who's died, doesn't offer us any certainty of that that person still exists at all. All we know is they're not there. He continues, it presents us with the fact of absence. The fact of absence. They're not there. They're gone. And says nothing as to whether this is a sequel to annihilation or only a disappearance with regard to ourselves. That is, and this is what's just an incredible moment, I think, is that at that moment when you realize that the person is absent, you have to kind of make a decision, which is a truly kind of existential decision because there's no proof either way. That is, either the absence of the person is because they've been annihilated, they don't exist anymore, which is the Epicurean view, or that they have disappeared only with regard to ourselves, which is to say, they still exist, but not in a form that I can get in touch with, in the form that I'm in. He continues, the belief in survival, and again, survival always means personal survival of death, promises us that our own death will reunite us with him who has disappeared, that we shall once more hear his voice in unknown circumstances and liberated from the former body. But a pure and simple experience of death does nothing either to confirm or to destroy this promise. In any case, it is a purely human experience. And that is a really incredible moment, and that is that our experience of death is a kind of a despairing experience of the absence of the person that we love, and what we cannot deny is that they are gone. What we cannot deny is that the mysterious absence, the disappearance of the person, and this is what pulls us into the realm of death, and it's because we love them, right? If we didn't love them, it wouldn't be as powerful. As he says, our community with them is broken. And it's at that moment that we can go either way. Well, the person is gone. The person is, in a sense, not being here. And in the way that they can never be here again. And it's at that moment that we have to sort of decide, I guess, is that disappearance due to their annihilation? That is, they don't exist anymore, and that's why they're absent. Or is that disappearance only a disappearance with regard to us? Well, they still exist, but not in a form that I can contact the way that I'm structured, my human self. It's really, I think, an incredible moment, and it forces us to make that decision, and as we'll see, Landsberg makes his decision about, and what I'm referring to is that decision about whether the absence of the person is due to their annihilation, or whether the absence of the person is due simply their disappearance relative to us.